Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's panel webinar, Return to Work and Inclusive Design, COVID-19 and Beyond. Today, we're extremely happy to welcome our panelists, Jutta Treviranus and Jess Mitchell. Jutta Treviranus is the director of the Inclusive Design Research Center and professor in the Faculty of Design at the OCAD University in Toronto. And Jess Mitchell is the senior manager of Research and Design at the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University in Toronto.
And here I'm going to go to an analysis of work within a spectrum. On the one end of the spectrum, we have work as an engineered machine, and this is how most of work is being considered at the moment. And at the other edge, we have work as an organic organism, or any enterprise that involves work as an organic organism. Work as an engineered machine views workers as replaceable parts of a machine. It requires conformance in terms of timing, production. It requires micromanagement, and it requires a segregated set of steps that are in lock with each other. This type of view of work also requires a hierarchy of control and oversight. Work as an organic organism, however, is at the opposite end of the spectrum. There's a common compass, a vision or mission, but no prescriptive path. There's an opportunity for everyone within the organism to be creative, to innovate, and it's dependent on teamwork and complementarity and a flexibility of roles where everyone understands what the mission is and can step in to do whatever is necessary. So what does this have to do with inclusion? Inclusion is about choices. It's about options and flexibility for workers. When you're in an engineered work environment, there are very hard constraints. You need to have a very, very specific formula for each cog within the wheel. If you are in an organic work environment thrives on diversity and choices and on diverse perspectives. And the other thing to note is that work is changing, and we have not only robotics, but AI automation, automated decision system coming down the pipe and very much already integrated into our work. And if we think about what is the future for workers within this vision of the future of work, we have to recognize that anything formulaic can be accomplished by machines. Engineered work can be replaced by machines. And to some extent, many of the companies that are looking at the future of work have already realized that. And they are using models like the Uber model, where the current human drivers are used as data systems to teach the automated workers who will take their place. And many of the work surveillance systems are collecting data on how people perform and what is the optimal performance, such that that data can be fed to robots. So we have to think about, what are we setting up our workers for? What are we setting up our learners for? And human resources definitely needs to change, because our entire job description, hiring process, and especially ones that are using artificial intelligence to assist, are about hiring replaceable workers that each can fill a very prescribed job description, assessing based on past optimum, rewarding conformance, training to conform to a particular formula, and assumptions about the time required to perform a particular task.
Many of us within this pandemic have had to answer the question for ourselves, and our communities have had to answer the question, what is essential? We've realized that there are people who have families that need their care, and that they need to be home to care for their families during this pandemic, which has an impact on work. We've realized that not everyone has high-speed internet and a computer. And we've realized that giving someone a mask to wear still does not solve some of their basic human needs like shelter, food, and clean water. And again, those are things that we saw beforehand but have been magnified now. There are a lot of other things that we've realized, that teachers are kind of amazing and really essential people in our lives. We've realized that 6-year-olds really don't understand the QWERTY keyboard, and it makes no sense to them. And we've realized that sitting in a restaurant is a luxury. I hope that we've realized that the most who are at risk are the ones who started below zero before this pandemic and are now at further risk. We realize things like the big box stores are fundamentally different from the small corner stores, and what they give to communities is quite different. It's shifted our perspective, and hopefully we're seeing things differently. But we're at the risk of losing that too, unfortunately. I bristle every time I hear someone talk about how eager they are to get everything back to normal. Because in normal, I don't think, asked this question enough: what is fair? Our normal was rife with inequalities. The social, economic, professional disparities. We see all the new ways we can oppress through the lens of COVID-19. Who is essential? Who can call in sick to work or work from home? And who can protect their children from risk? And the health disparities. We've got healthcare workers grappling with this now. And these are deep ethical issues. Who should get vaccinated first? How do we decide who gets a ventilator? This moment is an opportunity. There was just an article yesterday in the New York Times called "Welcome to the YOLO Economy, You Only Live Once." And here's a quote from Jonathan Nightingale saying that employees have a totally unprecedented ability to negotiate in the next 18 to 48 months. If I, as an individual, am dissatisfied with the current state of my employment, I have so many more options than I used to have. What we've seen is people burning out. We've seen people saying, my company says everybody's going to be back in the office in June. I'm going to quit before June. I don't want to work that way again. I don't want that kind of work-life balance. And I know that I can find another place to work where people are more tuned into that. And the question then, I think, becomes, if you're not rethinking how we can go back to work, or whatever that means, how we can continue work, why not? So what we saw during this pandemic is all of those things that companies absolutely couldn't do before COVID, they actually pivoted to do and have been doing for over a year. You had large, complex companies and governments and systems who could not work from home, working from home overnight, arranging for captions on all of their phone calls, or video conference calls, making alternative formats to cover different area codes, creating flexible work times because they realized that some of their employees were caring for seniors in their home or had children that weren't going to daycare or to schools. We saw people opening up conferences, and instead of 30 of the usual suspects showing up to your talk, you had hundreds from all over the globe. We saw events opening up, teaching changed. Suddenly, people were talking about a pedagogy of care. So what does it look like to care for students during this time? Classes are recorded, created audio files, we had transcripts, we had captions, we had extensions, we had universities and systems encouraging that we be looser on things like grammar. This is a moment where we didn't ask people to demand a kind of a level of quality of things that were not essential, but rather to demand that we work to bridge the digital divide. The digital divide getting wider for some. Again, the haves and the have-nots. Students who didn't have access to high-speed internet going to outside local libraries to pick up the internet. Students who didn't have access to technologies, being completely dependent upon school systems to provide them with those technologies. So the way that I like to think about it is, do you make any decisions in your professional role? And we all do. And So if you make decisions and they have an impact on another person, then you are a designer, and your designs have an impact on those people. You are declaring this thing and not anything else when you make those decisions. You might have reasons, and they might range from that's the way we always do it, as Jutta mentioned, to something more horrendous, like because I said so, or because research shows it's good for the majority, or most people operate this way. If you make decisions that affect another, you're designing, and your decisions are not neutral. We make these decisions all the time. And I would argue that most of our modern problems that we're confronting are ethical problems. So in the time of COVID, who gets a respirator? Who gets aid? Who's protected? Who's the protector? Who's the safer bet, right? And from the business perspective, I think the concept that's often called the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit comes into view. Who is accountable? Who's responsible? Where does the buck stop? And what is your moral responsibility? And I think that what I'm saying here is that that's all of us. Anybody in a leadership position who's making a decision that impacts another and is therefore a designer has a responsibility to do that. And this is a tweet from Val Afshar, the chief digital evangelist from Salesforce, and it says, "You're personally responsible for becoming more ethical in the society you grew up in." So I think that the responsibility is all of ours. You got a nice quote here from John Kerry. "The people who can benefit the most from good design often have the least access to it." And this part, I think, is quite important. Dignity is to design what justice is to law and health is to medicine. And I think that the point that I'd like to make here is that all of those are practices. They are not ends in and of themselves. We practice law, we practice medicine, and we practice design. In that practice, our hope is that we do reach what is, as John Kerry says, both the opportunity and responsibility of design. And he's an architect, by the way, not the comedian John Kerry. Design, he says, has a unique ability to dignify. It can make people feel valued, respected, honored, and seen. Of course, it can do the opposite as well. So as we're out there making decisions that impact another and designing our world, we have to ask ourselves, are we part of the revolution, or are we reifying and perpetuating cycles of oppression and exclusion?